In late June, a team comprised of folks from AIFA Bharat, IIT Madras, and iisc Bangalore came together to put together or released a benchmark called the Indic-Bias, which evaluates bias in the Indian context. Now, understandably, the benchmark studies on bias are predominantly reflecting the Western world, or to put it differently, the more represented world. The ecosystems like the Indian context, with its diversity and exquisite peculiarities, are not adequately represented or haven't been adequately benchmarked. And that's what the Indic-Bias benchmark seeks to do. It was released in a paper titled Fair Eye Tales, Evaluation of Fairness in Indian Context with a Focus on Bias and Stereotypes. It's a mouthful. There would be a link in the description, but it is super interesting. What it seeks to do is achieve a certain scale and scope that has not been done in the Indian benchmarking world before. While there have been studies, the Indic-Bias paper covers substantial scale with 85 identity groups across 4 categories, which are 12 religions, 24 castes, 30 regions, and 19 tribes, 20,000 manually verified scenarios, and 1,800 socio-cultural topics to evaluate bias. So effectively, they created a taxonomy using sociologists, using experts from the field, and created each of these scenarios and put all of these different categories across various scenarios and evaluated the LLMs across 3 major task groups. The first task was the plausibility task, which was when the LLM is asked a question about which entity is more likely to perform this in a particular scenario. Then there is the judgment task, which evaluates bias in decision making in ambiguous scenarios. And then there is the generation task, whether models provide equitable responses and or reinforce stereotypes. So across each of these multiple categories of individuals and backgrounds, each of these 3 task groups, the LLMs were evaluated on. I urge you to read this paper because it has a lot of information that it talks about. I'm not going to get into all of the details of it, just a little high level. But the short version is, yes, LLMs do suffer from bias in the Indian context. So one of the instances they talk about is a good check for bias is a refusal rate. So for example, if you ask a very biased question to an LLM, a good check is if the LLM just refuses to answer, fully acknowledging that this is a bias at play. So high refusal rates are good. It was found that most models except Mistral 7B and GPT-4 had low refusal rates. It was found that overall models reinforce stereotypes in over 50% of cases. LLMs were found to consistently reproduce and amplify real-world social hierarchies across religion, caste, region, and tribe. Social constructs associated with wrongdoing and authority, like criminal activities and leadership, were most polarized. The models also unfortunately reinforced associations and narratives of economic roles and certain castes and tribes, of labor division and tribal marginalization. This paper is quite exhaustive. It also lays down, it actually has a GitHub repo, I'll put that link as well, of the actual benchmark. It talks about the methodology of the study, as well as the kind of leaderboard of how each of these models have performed and how they went about the process. I urge you to take a look at it because if nothing else, even if you're not necessarily from the AI world, it's a very technical way of trying to give vocabulary or language to what biases are. As Indians, we may inherently understand this and we may inherently understand where rubber hits road. But in the act of seeing a machine kind of repeat those biases, it's crude and it's very transparent when you see a machine repeating these deep-held biases. Just for that experience alone, I urge all of you to read the paper, go through it, and understand what it's setting out to say. Also, I will clarify by saying the paper in itself lays out the limitations. They're the first to say that this is not exhaustive in any sense. And I can't imagine we are going to get to an exhaustive stage anytime soon. For example, they acknowledge that they have not evaluated cross-category biases. So for example, any categories which are across or intersection of both region and region, those characteristics have not been evaluated. And of course, in a country as large and as diverse as India, these are just like very, very good starting numbers. But it is the way that we are going to get ahead with it.